Okay, everybody, good morning. Happy Thursday to you. Liberation Day has occurred in the United States, according to Trump, so I would be remiss if I didn't give a few comments on the trade balance, imports, exports, some basic economic stuff, in fact. I focus on money, as you guys know, most of the time, the money supply, Bitcoin, the value of the dollar, the value of something. But a lot of talk about the trade balance, and so I just wanted to give my 2 cents here in light of the Trump tariffs on the McDonald and Heard Islands and some other cold places which have zero population or GDP. All right, so I'm going to put on a screen here. And this is the calculation of GDP. Okay, brass tacks. This is what GDP is. This is 2024. The numbers were just released last week, I guess, by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Four things make up GDP. Okay, personal consumption, expenditures, gross private domestic investment, the trade balance, which is the difference of exports and imports. That's the trade balance. And then government expenditure. At the end of the day, this makes up what we call GDP. Okay, so let's go through these quickly. I think it's important to just highlight every element. Personal consumption expenditures. Okay, we call the United States a service economy. This is goods and services. All this is always goods and services, but 2/3 of this number, the largest number, is services. Okay? So Americans with their Spotify accounts or their Apple Music accounts or their subscription to any number of newsletters. This is why I don't do a newsletter, by the way. It's always been a slightly scammy thing. I'm trying to just put the data out there, and if you want to donate, please do. Goods and services. All right, these are things that basically, when you spend, of course, food, living expenses, even recreational things like boats, jet skis, whatever you want, have at it. The United States has a good quality of life, and when people buy stuff, it gets dumped into this bucket. All right, just the final new. All right, I always remember from my Econ 101 class, used cars are not in this calculation. Okay, that was included in a prior year's GDP, not in a new GDP. Okay, so the final sale of new goods and services for private consumption, that's this big bucket, and 2/3 of this are just services. They're just yoga memberships. They're things that we kind of think that we need. Maybe we do. And by the way, I want to reiterate with this GDP stuff. A lot of people poo-poo on GDP. It does have value. I'm not one of these contrarian naysayer economists that just are going to poo-poo on everything establishment. There is some value. I use GDP all the time to rank countries. I rank countries with my global monetary base stuff. It's valuable. It's helpful to just understand the scale, the scope, the power of an economy. But certainly there are things to drill down in here. And at the end of the day, it's just a number that has no relevance to any one person's profitability. And that includes the United States government. All right, so it's important to keep in mind, and we'll get to that. But the biggest bucket here, all right, and by the way, the total is right here, 29.18 trillion. This is a 2024 number, $29.18 trillion GDP. The biggest bucket is personal consumption. 2/3 of this is services. All right. Now, the stuff that sticks around, okay, stuff that sticks around to the future, this is what's called gross private domestic investment. All right. So anything from real estate, new homes, to commercial. You even have software in here, which is a bit nebulous, of course. Um, things that are meant to stick around and it represents investment into new stuff, which is going to last more than a year, more than immediate gratification. That's in this bucket. Okay. And of course, all of this is unamortized. It's just the raw cost, new, as much as the government can get figures for that with tax returns and tax receipts. That's what's here. Okay, so all of this 19 trillion, nearly 20 trillion, is just instant gratification and need. Okay, of course, food, clothing, all of these things where you just need to consume. That's all in this big bar. The things that are going to last more than a year or more than the next week are in this 5.2 trillion. And we have imports, exports. That's obviously in the news. That's what I wanted to comment on. I'm going to skip this for a second. Let's go to government consumption. Okay, so what is government consumption in GDP terms? It is not total government spending. It's a key point. All right. It is not total government spending. It is only government spending on things that have, again, real effect on the economy from an expenditure standpoint. So you're going to include government salaries. You can argue about how good each government worker is at their job, and there's a lot of argument at the moment on that. Okay, so this 5 trillion includes government workers' salaries. It includes all defense spending. Okay, because defense is obviously a huge, clear and present danger all the time, even though people might not think about it. So defense is there. And infrastructure. Okay, so roads, civilian projects, state, local, water purification systems, these type things that typically, perhaps you and I, if you're watching this video, we might believe that the free market can do it better. But just at the moment in our society, these are generally government projects. Okay, I'm not saying the free market couldn't do it better. Certainly could. But generally, these things get handled by the government. And when the government pays for it, that's a government, as it says, consumption expenditure or a gross investment figure as well, because you can have infrastructure projects. So it's kind of a combination of these first two bars. All right. But where the first two bars are the private sector, the private economy, the government economy also has a big say in spending projects, pork spending. Slight allusion to the channel's name as well. $5 trillion. Very important, though, when we talk about government spending, and I make sure that I always include these figures in addition to government spending, is there are other items that are not part of GDP that would change sort of the picture of what the government spends on top of this 5 trillion. All right. Maybe you have heard that, and I've shown charts like this where government spending is really closer to 10 trillion. $10 trillion. Well, why is that? That's because all of the social payments, the transfer payments, the social cows, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, as well as interest on the debt that the Treasury is responsible for, all right, which is getting close to $1 trillion now. All of that is not included in GDP. Okay. So when you see a government spend as part of GDP, that's not total government spend. I'll come back to this. So again, when we talk about the fiscal budget, the fiscal deficit, or how much government spends on projects, it's just not all included in GDP. And so that should further enlighten you that GDP is just a number. It's just created by economists to sort of measure economic growth over the course of a quarter or a year. Typically, it should be, they come out in quarters, but by most governments. But it's easiest to look at GDP in a year. These are yearly flows. What I'm showing you right on this simple slide. It's nothing more than that. It's not a profit and loss statement. There's no profit here. There's no loss. It's just spending. Okay. And you can call it, sometimes they call it GDP or GNI, gross national income. Those are two sides of the same coin. Okay, here's just looking at it from the expense side of companies. You can look at it GNI, which is the income side. it's going to equal the exact same number. It doesn't often because of miscalculation or whatnot. It's usually off by a few billion or so. But GDP is the same thing as GNI, if you hear that, okay? It's two sides of the same coin. Bottom line, it's all new goods and services. It's just the value of new goods and services sold throughout the year, okay? All right, now we come to the trade balance, okay? So look, net exports of goods and services, foreign economy. The green, the positives, are exports. That's what the United States would produce and export to the rest of the world. The blue, the negative number here, the only negative number in this GDP calculation is imports. And as you can see, if you add this up, that's a trade balance of negative 900 billion. Okay, so the sum of these two numbers in the GDP calculation is negative 900 billion. So if you take 19.8 trillion, 5.3 trillion, and 5 trillion in government spend, but then subtract 900 billion, this will get you your 29.2 trillion in GDP. I hasten to say this, my buddy Yael from the Consumer Choice Center, who we interviewed on Friday, the interview will be coming out soon. He made this point as well. When you talk about the trade balance or just the calculation of imports and exports, that's not a profit and loss number. There is no, if there's a trade balance where there's equal goods and services coming into one country, or there's a trade imbalance, such as the United States with a negative $900 billion trade balance, there's no net final number. It's just the calculation, okay? The United States could, well, let's just say what the United States does, okay? So the United States, let's say they import $900 billion worth of steel and aluminum more than they export in everything else all the way around the world. That doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the economy other than the United States imported $900 billion more of steel and aluminum than they exported in other products, timber or consulting services or software or cars. It's not a number in and of itself that has any profit and loss meaning. And so this is the first point when it comes down to tariffs and the idea of a trade balance or a trade imbalance. The first rule of free trade that people should know, and yes, I know we don't have a free trade society. We have, if it was free trade, you would need just one word, two words on a paper. It says, free trade, and that's it. There's no, we don't have free trade in the world. That's a problem. But lower taxes, lower trade are always going to be better, right? When you have higher taxes, usually you're going to get less of something, okay? When you tax something, you get less of it. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. That's the old saying, right? But why would it be beneficial for a country to trade, even if it was better at, say, two things? Let's just say steel and aluminum. Okay, let's say that the United States is better. This is obviously a falsity, but let's just say the United States is better at manufacturing steel products and aluminum products better than China. In reality, it's probably the other way around, but I'm just using this as an example. Why would it be better still to trade with China or with India or with whoever, even if the United States was better at steel products and aluminum products than their trading partner? So calculated as a cost per widget, the old economic word, whatever it is, say the United States is better in two products with their trading partner, why would it be better to still trade? The answer, of course, is specialization. When you specialize, when you can focus on what you're good at, then the country that is, say, even worse in both things can pick up the slack in one while you do the other. That's the basic idea of specialization. And it's a natural thing, all right? There's natural resources, there are uh, HR competencies, labor competencies in certain countries and others. I'm not saying any one person is omniscient in figuring this out, but this is the economy. This is the market. This is why free trade is always better. It's always better because it's the simple principle of specialization will allow countries to produce more than they otherwise would had they not engaged in trade. That's the bottom line with trade. All right. So there's this idea now with this Liberation Day tariffs that this 900 billion trade imbalance, all right, where the world is importing $900 billion more, exporting into the United States. The United States is importing $900 billion more worth of goods and services than it exports. Trump thinks that this is sort of a revenue opportunity or a profit center. There's no indication in trade that that's ever the case. There's no indication. Because if you tax these imports more, it's quite possible. And again, I haven't done the analysis. I have an article just to show you, which is fun on this in a second, but let's let the economic gurus actually come up with these calculations. But there's no indication that these tariffs, these blanket minimum 10% tariffs, are going to decrease the imports and raise the exports, decrease the imports and raise the exports, or keep this number balanced and increase this personal consumption number. There's no bottom line, let's make a deal scenario where that is absolutely going to happen. It just doesn't exist. It's very possible that if you tax these imports that come into the United States, these imports could plummet. And as we know, there's going to be reciprocal tariffs. So these exports could plummet as well. And then now you have less inputs into what you want to sell to your domestic audience, to your domestic economy. So it's very possible that with higher tariffs, all right, you could crash your imports. Thus, your exports would also crash because you have reciprocal tariffs. And then your final net output is lower, both on the investment side and on the consumption side. There's no guarantee for any of this. This is just an observation of the economy. That's the important thing about tariffs. Everybody knows in the free market world, when you tax something, you get less of it. All right. So when you tax good jobs, you're going to get less good jobs. And when you subsidize something, you get more of it. All right. So if you subsidize unemployment, you'll get more unemployment. These are basic free market concepts, and tariffs are not immune to these concepts. Again, I have my own opinions about Trump in the foreign policy and the defense world, which is not so positive at the moment. Everybody knows that. But there's nothing here that's magical, where if this trade imbalance somehow shrinks to zero, okay, it does not mean that these two items go up, okay? This could shrink to zero by imports falling to 2 trillion and exports falling to 2 trillion. there's no rhyme or reason. There's no inherent fundamental concept that can be achieved from tariffs. And the Smoot-Hawley tariffs proved this during the Great Depression, that will show that your economy will improve from this added tax. All right, it's just more tax. There's just no fundamental reason that will show that this 19.8 trillion will rise and this 5.3 trillion will rise. It's just a funny one here. This is from Bitcoin crypto outfit, Cointelegraph. Did ChatGPT come up with Trump's tariff formula? Okay, most people put it in there. And basically, yes, the idea, again, that the trade imbalance, which is 900 billion, okay, if you take that on a country level, all right, as I say here, if the U.S. runs a $20 billion deficit to some country on $100 billion worth of imports, the rate is calculated at 20%. And if the deficit were only 5%, you'd still have a 10% floor. So, it appears that this idea is going around AI as well, which I think is just funny. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't really pay attention that much to the details, but it does make sense that this is how they're thinking of it. This is a fictional thing. It just exists in the imagination of people's minds that a $900 billion trade deficit is bad for an economy. All right. Um, I should run some more of these numbers on, say, like Singapore or Hong Kong back in the day. These places had no resources. They were on barren rock. They had no resources to export, and they still became massive, booming metropolises because they opened up free trade. They opened up net foreign investment to come into their economy, and they had low tax, and that's what free markets love. They love low tax and cooperation. So that's the picture. It comes down to this. As one more interesting thing to show here. This, remember, when you add these four bars up, and this is a function of a positive and a negative, the trade balance. All right, it's very simple. Exports in green, imports in blue, negative 900. Okay, so these three are positive numbers in the GDP calculation. This is a negative in this case. But again, it's not a guarantee in either scenario. If this was positive and this was negative, that we would live better off. It's just not a guarantee. No one has figured that out yet. There's no fast and hard rule here. The total of these four bars is 19.18 trillion. Okay. Now, you can do another calculation, all right, which the Bureau of Economic Analysis does, which shows you all of the final sales that happened between domestic producers, all right, and foreign purchasers of United States goods. Okay, so it's a sort of an extra calculation. I'm not going to go through it. That will get you your gross national product. All right, and here gross national product is 29.24. This is interesting as well because this is higher than 29.18. It's all of this is a rounding error. Okay, this is a $60 billion difference, but 29.24 GNP versus 29.18 GDP. What it's saying is that through all of its investments in companies, foreign companies, basically the bottom line of the United States domestic population, all right, whether that's a private individual or a company, they actually earn a little bit more in the world than the GDP calculation itself. Okay, it's not worth going into it. Don't worry, but we have a slight net benefit than every foreigner that invests into the United States. Okay, if this number were lower, we could say that if the gross national product was lower than the gross domestic product, then we could say that foreign nationals on balance do better than American nationals in the GDP calculation. But that's not the case. That's not the case. On balance, Americans do better than foreign nationals in all of the milkshake of economic output that is calculated by the United States. It's close. It doesn't even matter. Even if this was slightly negative, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But it's just funny that this is higher. Okay, and maybe this is something to track in the future. If this is actually stays higher or even goes lower, that would be something as well. All right, so I want to focus on government again. The quickest way to improve your GDP as a free market person would be to cut down this number and put it here. All right, both in private, domestic, and personal consumption. Okay, because the market's always going to be more efficient than the government. Everybody knows that, even though they might not want to believe it. So cutting down this number and putting it here would be better. It would be better. How you do that? If you are sort of willy-nilly cutting everything, as they seem to be doing now, frustrating a lot of voters, doing things perhaps unconstitutionally even, that might have repercussions politically for the Republicans. Let's see. We saw what happened in the Wisconsin vote, even though Mr. Musk tried to buy that vote. But the fastest way to economic growth would be to cut this number down. Right? Doesn't even have anything to do with imports and exports. Not tariffing imports or exports would be very good. Okay, but now that we're doing that, there's no guarantee that this number somehow goes down and this export number somehow goes up, and then we can pay down the national debt. They're throwing out things like $600 billion a year this is going to save. We'll see. We'll see. But there's no economic reason that that would be the case. Tariffs, like any tax, you're just going to get less of whatever you tax. That's the basic free market principle. You will get less of it. And if you subsidize, you'll get more. So if you subsidize unemployment, you're going to get more unemployment. All right, so the $5 trillion, there's a lot of work that the government needs to do. $5 trillion, like I said, that does not include the sacred cows, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. It also doesn't include interest. Let's look at economies now where we do include those things and run the calculation. So first of all, let me just say, what is 5 trillion divided by 30 trillion? Something like 18%, 17, 18%. Okay, so that's the official GDP calculation of government as a function of product. But as we know, that's not the only expense. Okay, there are transfer payments out, and there are interest payments. Those are the big payments on the debt. Okay, so if you add those back in, you get this chart. Let's just make it easy and look at the United States first. This is with total government expenditures in as a component of the economy. Okay, so I'm adding back things that are not calculated here. Remember, I'm adding back Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt. You add all that in, you get this. It seems like we are for sure moving in a direction that is even beyond this chart. Okay, I'm only going back to 1990 here, fall of the Berlin Wall. But you can see that, whether it was good old times in the 90s or boom times just before the global financial crisis and then after the global financial crisis, total government expenditures, just as a relative proportion of the economy, and again, this includes interest, this includes Social Security payments, was something like a third of the economy. Now it's a little bit more than a third. I don't even know what to predict will happen with this new type of an administration. But unless they really, really cut down on those payments, I'm not optimistic that new taxes are going to solve this imbalance. And again, a trade imbalance doesn't mean anything. No one profited more or less. Like this had nothing to do with anybody's net profit calculations. It's just an observation of the economy. That's what GDP is. It's just an observation of final figures. But if you add taxes, you typically will get less of something. So if you add taxes on this 4 trillion, imports might go down. And if imports go down, maybe you're not going to get as cheap of inputs for your outputs, which is the personal consumption expenditures and the gross private domestic investment. Notice how the rest of the world has followed the US's lead. China was down to 11% of the government as a function of their economy in the 90s. Okay, it was actually interesting. It was down from the early 90s. Now they're up almost to us. Let's look at Russia. Gas station disguised as a state. They jumped up from the year 98. They had this Russian crisis, bailed out their economy, never recovered. So they've always been up to our levels as well. Very low after the fall of the Soviet Union. Okay, this would have been better for them, but they decided to, again, as most people do, bail out rather than take the pain when they had a currency crisis. And so they've always been at the same levels as the United States. Ukraine, defense is a huge part here. They're even more. And then let's look at Western Europe. Always spent more than the U.S. Western Europe is very high, nearly 50% of the economy. Okay, 50% of the economy is government spend. And remember, that's total government spend. It includes interest payments. It includes transfer payments, social payments. That is not included in this number for the US, 5 trillion. You really have to like double this, basically. You double this. You get to about 10, even more than 10 trillion to get to this percentage of 37% as a function of the economy. And then Eastern Europe, close as well. So everybody's spending. Everybody's spending a lot as a function of the economy. And as you know, I'm quite worried about the defense position of Eastern Europe at the moment, with the tyrannical Russian war being waged and raging in Ukraine. So I don't see any of these things decreasing. These are aircraft carrier type moves, right? It's very slow to move these. And even if there is going to be some wild shock to the economy, it doesn't seem like a shock that's going to decrease government spending. At least not in non-United States countries. In the United States, obviously there's a lot of talk with Doge and everything, but I'm not sure that will happen. And here's another, here's another headline here that shows how the U.S. sort of wants to back away from its leadership role in the world. But when the Europeans say, well, we don't necessarily trust that you're not going to have a kill switch on the F-35s, or we want to buy locally from European stocks, the U.S. doesn't like that either. They still want to sell their weapons to its allies. So it seems like it's a case of the U.S. wanting to have its cake and eat it too, without any of the security guarantees. Because as I've talked many times, it seems like it's possible that Article 5 is a dead letter, at least for Eastern European countries. So I'd say it's a very dangerous time, continues to be a very dangerous time in the world. Defense is a huge issue. Defense, by the way, is inside of this number, 5 trillion. It goes up every year regardless, right? Because of inflation, basic inflation. So that's something. But this is going to go up in the United States. This is going to go up around the world. Okay. No guarantee that these things go up in gross form, right? We can have GDP contracting after global financial crises. And there's no guarantee that this trade balance will decrease. I've already said it enough on this little episode, but it's just a fiction. It's not a real... Yes, it is the case that the United States imports 900 billion more than it exports at the moment, all right? And it is the case that this Liberation Day is meant to decrease that delta. What I'm saying is the reduction of this delta it cannot stand alone with any of these other inputs, all right? Defense sales, by the way, would be included in the exports. All right, so defense sales. So if those defense sales are going down from other countries, then that's not really going to help the trade balance either. You take something and you tax it, very likely you'll get less of that thing. There's no guarantee that having less imports will raise the final product of the goods or services that you as an American economy want to produce. Let me know if you like this. I will perhaps another good thing is to track GNP. Remember, this is what Americans feel versus their GDP, which is Americans and the world. All right. Let me know if you want to track that more over time, or imports, exports, things like this. Usually I like to do the longer scale charts like these. But I don't see any of these falling down. The United States is trying to bring its number down, but I don't see that number coming down in really any other economy in the world. at the moment. So I think that's where we are. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good day.